note, Madam Clerk, I had some issues as well using the original invite, and it wasn't seeming to be working. So I used the one that Rob just sent like an hour ago or something like that, and it worked fine. So whether that's of any help, I don't know.
Okay, thank you, Brian.
Chief Knoll's using one that he just forwarded to me a few minutes ago, so I'm not sure. It must be on his end.
Did you want me to wait, Madam Clerk, or do you want me to go ahead, or what?
I think you're good to go, Chair O'Leary, because Randy's going to be doing his overview first.
Okay, we'll call the meeting to order. Good afternoon, everyone. Hope everyone had a great holiday. I'm unhappy to announce that I'm up 12 pounds since the start of the and I'm only announcing that because I'm assuming everyone is less, so you should all feel good about yourself. Is there a declaration of interest? Seeing none, item number 3, review of work to date. Randy, you're taking that?
Yeah, thanks, Chair O'Leary, and good afternoon, everyone. So there were 2 meetings in December to provide a bit of an update and overview of the recommendations and opportunities that came from those meetings. So the first meeting was on December 11th, which focused on labor and employment. We received presentations from the 4 County Labor Market Planning Board, YMCA Employment Services, and Grey County Economic Development staff. So we've summarized the potential recommendations and opportunities from that meeting, and that starts at page 16 of the recommendation and opportunities document that's linked in the agenda. So just to highlight some of the discussion and the recommendations and opportunities from that meeting. Unemployment rates continue to remain low for the region despite the pandemic. There was discussion around the need for more accurate data for each municipality based on past labor surveys. And it was noted as long as the response rate was high enough, that should be achievable. So staff will work with 4 County Labor Market Planning Board to explore this further. With respect to commuters, it was noted that the majority of workers in Hanover Owen Sound travel under 15 minutes to work, with 19% of commuters have a 30-minute or more commute. And staff will work with the 4 County Labor Market Planning Board to determine how many residents commute into Hanover Owen Sound for work, as this was raised as a discussion point at that meeting. In terms of retention and recruitment, we've heard from employers experiencing difficulties in retaining and recruiting staff. It was noted we have what's called a missing middle in people as well as missing middle housing. The missing middle in our labor force is the 25 to 45-year-olds. We do need youth to return after school. And it was noted that this missing middle age cohort and the housing missing middle are correlated. The top 3 retention strategies identified were regular increase in salary, recognition for service, and training opportunities. And the top 3 reasons for positions being hard to fill include lack of technical skills, lack of work experience, and not enough applicants. So one of the opportunities is to potentially work with employment organizations to provide employers, especially small businesses, with more HR information and training to assist with employee retention and recruitment strategies. With respect to migration, migration influences labor force, and it was noted that most people moving into Hanover were from West Grey and Brockton. This is based on 2016 census data. And those moving to Owen Sound were from Chatsworth, Toronto, South Bruce Peninsula, Georgian Bluffs, and London. It was noted that this may be changing as a result of the pandemic, with more people moving into the area from larger city centers. So one of the opportunities is to work with real estate associations to analyze data they collect on people moving to the area to better understand where our people are moving from, and from a labor force perspective, where are they coming from. In terms of workforce participation, it was noted that 15 and 19-year-olds have a higher participation rate in both Hanover and Owen Sound than the rest of Grey County and the province. And the highest participation rates for Owen Sound and Hanover are ages 20 to 24, or 20 to 24 and 35 to 44, excuse me. It was noted that there are jobs without people and people without jobs, and this represents a mismatch in skill sets to what the labor force is demanding. It was also noted that our aging workforce is also an issue. In terms of employment services, it was noted that some people need to access services more than once, while some people need to opt out for mental health or housing reasons. In terms of life stabilization and overall wellness, it was noted that there definitely is a correlation or a relationship with income, education training, mental health, and access to stable housing. Therefore, we noted that there is a need to better understand what is often called the social determinants of health, and how some of the challenges that the task force have been discussing to date, including income, mental health, stable housing, access to transportation, education, these are all connected. And therefore, a multi-pronged and interconnected approach will be required to address some of these challenges. Employment training is key, and YMCA Employment Services is working with Grey County Economic Development staff, Sydenham Campus, and Launchpad for training opportunities. The group identified the need for working with employers to adjust their expectations, as well as working with youth with respect to social and communication skills when entering the workforce. The group also noted the importance of high school co-op programs and getting to youth earlier, such that they can make decisions early on the courses that they should take. So there definitely are opportunities to work with employment organizations to provide employers with further training regarding multi-generational workforces. There's also a need to explore opportunities to work with local school boards to provide information to students about local job opportunities and training and education opportunities locally, and starting that at the grade 6 level. There are also opportunities to enhance the high school co-op program and working with school boards and employers to provide further opportunities. And there's the possibility to look at school curriculum. Can it be enhanced to provide students with skills and information to better prepare them for employment? With respect to economic development, it was noted that collaboration and coordination are key, which is the rationale around the recent staff realignments between ECDev, tourism, and culture staff. And the continuation of the Economic Development Tourism Working Group will be key for collaboration. Broadband and initiatives such as SWIFT will be key to address the needs from a internet perspective and high-speed internet perspective of current and future employers, as well as our future workforce. Moving forward, it was noted that we need to listen to what businesses need. While the county is good at attraction, we also need to focus on retention. Transportation, it was noted that the Grey Transit Route, or GTR, is an important step forward to help people get to and from work and to connect to training and education opportunities. And the Sydenham campus will be key to helping a number of these programs, including the Business Enterprise Center, Catapult, the Tenneco Action Center, and CDFCs as well. It was also noted that working with Georgian College and the Launchpad will also be key. In terms of further research requested, in response to Councillor Milne's question in terms of whether farms are captured in the number of business statistics, so as of June 2020, there were 259 farms that were identified as having employees, i.e. farms with payroll, and just under 1,700 farms have no employees, i.e. farms have no payroll. And all these were counted in the business numbers. The task force also asked about workforce participation rates for Hanover and Owen Sound and asked how these compared to the provincial average. So for both Hanover and Owen Sound, the rate is considerably higher than average for residents that are 15 to 19 years old, with Hanover being 15.6% higher than the provincial average and 10.9% higher than the provincial average for Owen Sound. The participation rate for residents aged 20 to 24 years old is also higher than the provincial average, with it being 8.2% higher in Owen Sound and just under 1% higher in Hanover. And a table was attached to the recommendations and opportunities document. This table was provided to us from the 4 County Labour Market Planning Board. The task force also asked for further information about the types and numbers of businesses within Hanover and Owen Sound and how many have employees versus without employees or self-employed businesses. So a table from the 4-County Labor Market Planning Board was attached to the document, and it shows that there are a number of businesses in the retail trade for Owen Sound and Hanover, and for Owen Sound, healthcare businesses and social assistance employers are high, and other services, the other services category except public administration is high for Hanover. So that table was attached to that document. There was also questions around how many residents commute into Hanover and Owen Sound for work. And as I mentioned, staff are going to work with 4-County Labor Market Planning Board. However, we did attach a presentation that was provided actually earlier in 2020 from the 4-County Labor Market Planning Board, which is entitled the Mobility Report. So it has some further information about mobility patterns in Grey County as well as the region. Also attached is a link to a document from the YMCA Employment Services regarding questions posed by the task force. And these include how the job seeker education profile compares to the province and the whole Western region that we are part of when it comes to employment services from YMCA, as well as what the Ontario High School Equivalency Certificate completion rate is for our area. So I'm not going to go through these in detail. There is a link to a document in that recommendations and opportunities document. I'll just say though that there is a high level of job seekers with less than grade 12 in our region compared to the province and Western region. There is also a higher percent of job seekers with grade 12 or equivalent, and a lower percent of job seekers with post-secondary education within our region compared to the province and the Western region. With respect to the GED completion rate, there were 22 job seekers referred to GED in our region in 2019 to 2020, which represents 3% of the caseload, and there were a total of 161 job seekers referred to GED in the Western region, which is 13% of the caseload. So that provides a summary of the December 11th meeting. So before I go into the December 4th meeting, I'll just see if there's any questions or discussion on that. All right, hearing none, I'll go into the December 4th meeting. So the second meeting was held on December 14th and focused on youth and senior supports. We received presentations from the Bruce and Gray and Family Services, Bruce and Gray Child and Family Services, and Council on Aging Gray Bruce. So the summary from that meeting starts at page 22 of the recommendation and opportunities document. With respect to youth supports, Bruce Gray and Family Services have approximately 1,400 calls per year with concerns for children. Owen Sound and Hanover are the two biggest referral areas in Grey County. And the top reasons for a referral are a parent who has a problem, which is creating a risk for children, or a partner conflict and partner violence. Usually calls are made when parents have mental health issues or addiction issues, or there is partner violence. And most referral calls come from the Board of Education or police services. It was noted that 23 to 30% of referred families receive a longer term service of 18 to 24 months. Bruce Gray Child and Family Services, they usually try to place children with extended families or family friends if possible. And they also try to use the customary care for Indigenous children. Some of the summary of the challenges: there's a lack of adult mental health and addiction recovery services for parents, including a lack of recovery services for women and children in a residential setting. There are increasing rates of child and youth mental health problems. There are few in-home services in a large geographic area like ours, with small numbers of towns, cities, without sufficient population density to host some services. So the questions are, how do people in small towns and villages get those services? And does that force folks to larger centers like Hanover and Owen Sound? There's a lack of center-based daycare options for parents and children in need of those development skills. There's a lack of stable and affordable housing, and there's a lack of transportation options to access services and employment. In terms of opportunities then, is creating connections with community-based social supports, such as faith communities, sports coaches, community connections. There's continued cooperation amongst charities is key. Better data sharing between Bruce Grey Child and Family Services and municipalities and counties. Making center-based daycare available to more families and children. We need more local services for addiction and mental health at all ages. Increasing local transit and transportation opportunities better helps those on the margins to get to and from work. The need for more affordable and attainable housing, which I think has come up at every meeting. There's kids aged 0 to 4 years old represent a possible gap in their system if they're not in daycare or school yet, as they may not be reported in their system. Supporting school-based nutrition programs are key, and looking at programs such as community gardens will also be key in terms of providing a healthy food supply. On the senior support side, we received a presentation from Council on Aging, Grey Bruce, and it was noted that the pandemic has hit both seniors and the Council on Aging hard. Many meetings and social activities have been halted due to the need for physical distancing. Some are trying to have Zoom meetings in order to stay connected. They noted that radio and newspapers are a major source of local information for seniors. And it was noted that seniors have described anger and frustration, as well as fear and loneliness as effects of the pandemic. It was ultimately noted that seniors just want to feel that they still belong and are still needed in our communities. In terms of opportunities, Grey County, with support from Council on Aging, has submitted a grant application to what's called the Inclusive Communities Grant to help support the creation of an age-friendly community strategic plan for the county, as well as to explore some opportunities to create connections with seniors that were identified. And the grant funding will be announced in next month. There is a need to increase local content and good news stories on local radio. And it was noted that Ross Kentner and his connections at Bayshore may be a good resource to tap into. There's also a need for safe recreational opportunities, such as walking at the Bayshore, where seniors can still get out, get some exercise, as well as socialize. It was also noted that seniors, getting them involved in local committees and in volunteerism is key, as well as telling the stories of our seniors as our role models. Having counselors attend seniors advisor committees or councils on aging meetings was also recommended. And it was noted that Grey Highlands Museum staff is starting to record community stories, and this may be a good fit for local seniors to share their stories. So I apologize for the length of that, because we had to summarize 2 meetings because we weren't prepared the last meeting to provide both summaries, but that's an overview of the December 11th and December 14th meetings.
Thanks, Randy. Any questions from the committee? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to item number 4, policing perspectives in Owen Sound. Happy to introduce Chief Craig Ambrose. Chief, if it's okay with you, we'll just go right through your entire presentation. Committee members can jot down questions as you go along, and we'll save the questions for the end. Welcome, Chief Ambrose.
Mr. Chair, we do have Chief Knoll with us as well. He has joined the call.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I'll go through my presentation, and Chief Knoll may have a few comments to make while we're going through it, and then he has also provided some presentation.
Sure.
I will just tell the committee as well that my laptop, for whatever reason, is not working, so I don't have a webcam, so I've joined old school by way of desktop here today.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and I believe the presentation is going to be put up, and
Yes, I'm going to share my screen.
perfect. Thank you, Heather.
You're welcome. Can everyone see that?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Perfect.
All right, so thank you very much for allowing us to come and present today. And if you could forward, please. So if you can bring that whole one up. Sorry, there's some animation there. So in workload and calls for service, certainly over the last 10 years or so, from 2011 to 2020, including the pandemic time, we were below calls for service at the beginning of the year because everything was shut down, but we projected and ended up almost at a 4 to 5% increase over 2019. So every year our calls for service continue to increase, and that doesn't seem to be changing at all. And certainly with the mental health calls for service and the issues of the pandemic, we see that continuing next year. If you can go to the next slide, it's just a visual representation of where we are for calls for service. And you can see that starting in 2011, and then they started to ramp up and they continue to increase. Next slide. One of the things that's been concerning has been, and as the crime severity that's come to the city since 2011, our crime severity index has risen about 67%, violent crimes up 50%, and nonviolent crime is up about 77%. And for those of you not familiar, that's a Statistics Canada captured statistic that we, as police service, are mandated to provide them with that information. So that's collected and captured by StatsCan based on our clearing codes and certain rules and regulations that they have put in place. Next slide, please. As you can see in this slide on the left-hand side of the page, the violent crime, nonviolent crime, and overall crime, you can see that a smaller town or a smaller city, one significant incident can spike the violent crime, certainly, and that's why I indicate that 2 times there were homicides, because you'll see the increase. But overall, that increase in violent crime, as you can see, and it mirrors the nonviolent and overall crime index. And then compared to the overall provincial average that's in the green line, we are certainly climbing at a much higher rate than the rest of the province. And that's a concern, obviously, in this area. As you can see, the number of officers that we have on the right-hand side of the screen has decreased at the same time as our calls for service have increased. So there's certainly a very high burden on the police service in Owen Sound. We move to the next slide. This represents the number of arrests of individuals within the municipality. And you can see that's the number of arrested individuals, not the number of charges laid. But as you can see, from 2014, it steadily increased to 2018, 2019. And 2020 will be the same. And although there have been some pieces put into place to limit the number of arrests, including the number of charges and people out on conditions, those numbers continue to increase. Next slide. So what are some of the issues that are facing Owen Sound? It's a very unique city in that most communities this size are a bedroom community to other large and urban centers. Unlike Owen Sound, where it's an employment and a commercial hub and it draws people into the area. Similar populations are almost exclusively bedroom communities to larger cities. The population increases during the day, and that results in increased daytime volumes. And I'll have a slide shortly that shows the increase during the day that we have. The social services and support agencies have all been centralized in the city, and that supports those in need, but that also concentrates the marginalized population, along with statistically increased victimization and police involvement for those communities. So when you provide services and you put them into a community, it's not necessarily that those individuals are going to cause you problems. It's the people that victimize and prey on those individuals that are going to cause issues and problems. So many people who need supports are dealing with issues of health, poverty, food security, homelessness, and addictions, as you're well aware. Next slide, please. So what drives calls for service? This is an interesting from the Justice System report from the Justice Canada site. People who are using drugs recorded 4 times higher than non-users for victimization. People with mental health disabilities recorded 3 times higher than the normal population. And people with a history of homelessness are 5 times higher than the population who have never been homeless to be involved and become victims of crime. So when you bring people into the area that are suffering from addictions, mental health, and homelessness, certainly that is an increase in the demand on the calls for service for the population that are being served by the police. Next slide. So this one on the left-hand side just shows the Grey County housing units, and it shows that 50% of the Grey County housing units have been placed in Owen Sound. and then the breakdown for the other municipal areas in the county. And as well, and Mr. Schertzer was mentioning it earlier, the social determinants of health certainly cause issues and create issues for policing. And I just made a comment that 51% of the population of Owen Sound have a post-secondary certificate, diploma or degree, have no post-secondary certificate, diploma or degree, while 16.5% fall in the category of low income. Certainly, when you compare that to the provincial average of 45% and 14.4% respectively, we have issues in the fact that those individuals are going to create calls for service, and those social determinants of health are affected by policing, because as you are well aware, police response to calls for service, not just criminal calls for service, it's only about 60 to 70% of our calls for service. Many of the others are situations that the police are responding to who, because there are no other alternatives, they're working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Next slide. So social determinants of health, median total income for an individual in Sound compared to Ontario is about $3,000 to $4,000 less. Income for families is significantly less than the Ontario average. And one other thing that fuels calls for service for the police are 23% of Grey Bruce residents identified as heavy drinkers compared to 17% provincially. And certainly alcohol does create issues and policing issues. And as a result, that drives calls for service. Next slide, please. So this slide just shows very clearly shows the increase in calls for service and the fact that it isn't the people that are here in the overnight hours. As you can see, most of them are from midnight, they're 0 until through to 6 a.m. The calls are pretty much standard from what they are each year, and they decrease over from time, obviously, that most people would normally go to bed until 6 in the morning. And then between 6 and 8, there's a significant increase in those calls for service that runs right through until about 7 p.m. at night before they start to taper off again. So not in a larger city, a lot of the, or even in the bedroom communities, that daytime number is a lower number. That's where your calls for service are really low. This shows that people are here in town, people are using the services, people are getting involved, the police are responding to calls for service, so, for an increased population during the day. Next one, please. This shows an example of a what we refer to sometimes as a catch and release. There's a number of people that are responsible for a significant number of crimes within the city, and this breaks down some of the charges for failing to comply, breach of recognizance, all different those types of charges that relate to terms and conditions on a release from custody. So you'll see that those continue to climb in 2019. 2020, they dropped significantly, but that wasn't a result of anything that's happened. It's a result of a change in the Crown's office where they said if somebody's out on a term of release where it says they're not to drink, they're to obey a curfew, and they're to keep the peace and be of good behavior. The direction from the Crown used to be that you would lay 3 charges against that individual because they were out, because you caught them, they'd been drinking at 4 o'clock in the morning out on the street. So they're obviously not keeping the behavior they were supposed to. They've been drinking and they're past their curfew. That was changed just at the end of 2019 to say, you know what, these are administrative charges, lay 1 charge, put all the facts and issue in, and then we'll treat it as a 1 charge as opposed to 3. So that's the type of thing why the numbers have dropped, but they certainly haven't dropped in the same type of numbers that those charges those related charges were dropped. So overall, it's probably continuing to increase. Next slide, please. So this is a call relating to officers and mental health. This chart shows you from 2018 through to 2020. Our mental health calls for service continue to increase throughout that time. In the 4th quarter of 2020, the MHART, that's the Mobile Mental Health and Addiction Response Team, it was introduced here in Owen Sound. It's since been introduced just this past summer, late or early fall, into the other municipalities within Grey and Bruce counties. But we were the first one. We piloted the program with Grey Bruce, CMHA Grey Bruce. And you'll see that there was a significant decrease. It would be nice to say that that whole decrease was related to the implementation of the new program, but there was one individual who was an exceptional case that also drove those numbers down. But as you can see, starting again in 2020, those numbers started to increase again as a result of the fact that we're living in a pandemic, and really the full mental health issues relating to that pandemic haven't been felt yet. But once the crisis is over and things get back to whatever the new normal is, there's a prediction that the mental health issues will continue for many. So next slide, please. So this next one just shows on the left-hand side the time spent responding to mental health calls for service. It increases annually, the amount of time that we spend there. And on the right-hand side, basically it's a comparison that between the time we spend on a mental health call for service and an assault call. So you'll see that both of them involved either an apprehension or an arrest. They involve some type of follow-up, some type of a report, things like that. So it's a fairly easy comparison to make, but you see that a lot of the time spent on the mental health call for service is spent looking after somebody, taking them to the hospital. We've made great strides with Grey Bruce Health Services and Hanover Hospital in introducing some protocols and agreements and terms of patient care and turnover of patient care. That's been very successful. That's been implemented in just this past fall. We haven't yet seen the impact of those on the numbers and the times for our officers and the turnover, and hopefully limit that amount of time spent at the hospital by the officers. The next one. So this was interesting as I was putting the package together. It just was York Regional Police saying that they had 7,484 mental health calls for service, and they go and explain that's about 20 a day. And if you flip to the next slide, there's a comparison between the two that they have a population of 1.2 million. We have a population of 22,000, and their annual mental health calls for service are 7,500 compared to our just over 1,000. So we do have some significant mental health impacts here locally in the community. We're about 1 in 20, and they're about 1 in 160. So it shows you what their population is and their number of calls. So next slide, please. So this is interesting. Why does Owen sound so busy? And during Mr. Scherzer's review about the amount of the population and the daytime population, the people coming into work, from a 2016 market area data report commissioned by the city, their daytime population is much higher than the population living within the city limits. Daytime population estimates include those that both work in the area and residing in the area. And it's important to identifying business potential as well as demands on policing. So that report estimated the daytime population in 2016 at just over 40,000. Next slide, please. So the interesting challenge is the tax base reflects the native or resident population, but the city provides services such as policing to those that are present within the city limits, including transients. And although transients may be benefiting local businesses, they also create increased service demands. So next slide. One example of that is schooling. So this information comes from the two school boards combined. And you'll see that about 53% of the people in Owen Sound attending school are from Owen Sound. So it's almost 50-50 of those coming from outside of the city. Yet anything that happens at the school, anything that happens during the day, those issues and concerns and problems all get left with the city and their responsibility to follow up and police that while they're here during the school day. In addition, Georgian College enrolls more than 1,000 students, some living within the city, and some of them are living in residence and some are commuting as well. So that's just one example where we say that the population that we police doesn't necessarily reflect the sign on the wall on the side of the road. Next one, please. So when you look at when I say about the calls for service and our comparators, when you look at the population of Owen Sound compared to some of the others and the calls for service, probably the daytime population being about 40,000, and Woodstock has a population of about 40,000. Besides the discrepancies in the annual police budget, the number of officers and such, I think it's important to note that when you look at the mental health related calls, we have almost as many as a population of almost double our size, and we actually had more charges in 2019 than a population double our size related to criminal activity. So I think it's we do police 22,000 people that live here, but we also police the 20,000 or close to 20,000 that come and visit during the day. Next slide. So criminal code offenses per officer for 2018 and 2019 has been very similar. We just got that after this was completed, but you'll see Owen Sound compared to our comparators are 54.8 charges per officer. That's number 3 in the province. And Chief Knoll, I believe were you number 2?
Yes, that's correct, Chief. Hanover was number 2. Brockville Police was number 1 in the province. So it went Brockville, Hanover, and then Owen Sound.
Yeah. So, and then if you can advance the slide as well. Violent crime severity within the city. Right now, Owen Sound sitting at number 8 at 105.81 compared to our comparators as well that you can see. So the results, the increased calls for service and officer workload obviously can't be maintained. Public safety is a serious concern as you see an overall crime and violent crime increase well beyond the provincial and national averages. Officer mental health and wellness are serious concerns. Call queues and backlogs. No longer is it where the officer's out waiting for a call to come in and to respond to. We're always having a list of calls, and officers respond by the severity and look after those calls and just take the next one off the list. And oftentimes people are waiting longer times for a non-serious incident. That reactive response obviously leaves a gap in service that would address with proactive officers, and additional officers or officers available to conduct proactive duties would meet those demands for our service. So next, one interesting aspect and one that causes concern for me when I'm looking at the police budget is court services. So Section 137 of the Police Services Act sets out the municipality or the board is responsible for court security. Due to the fact that the Owen Sound Courthouse is located within the city limits, that cost and those responsibilities fall to the the Owen Sound Police Services Board, and thus the city. But the courthouse serves a much larger area than that. They serve the majority of Grey and Bruce counties, with the exception of what's covered off by Walkerton Court. And although some of it is offset with provincial grant funding, those security costs, they don't cover the anywhere near the full amount of our court security costs overall. Next slide. So a number of years ago, when they introduced the changes and made court security a municipal expense that was supposed to be offset, or some of it was offset by the Provincial Offence Act fines, and that was providing the county to offset that download for court security costs. In 2019, there was approximately $420,000 in grants received, resulting in the city still covering a shortfall of approximately $282,000. And as I said, those individuals that are appearing in our court could be coming anywhere from Dundalk all the way up through to Tobermory, with the exception of West Grey and Hanover. Most of their cases are going over to Walkerton Court, but it's a large area that's covered by the court security here in town. There's currently a court security grant funding being reviewed by the Ontario government, and it hasn't been guaranteed moving forward past March of this year here that we're in now. So that's as I say, that's about a $420,000 question, was whether or not that's going to be continued or there's going to be some type of grant funding moving forward. Increased costs as a result of OSPS being used for prisoner handling while the courts remain open. So currently the courts never did close, even during the original portion of the pandemic. They continued, although only by piecemeal, they continued operating. Now, none of the arrests that take place during the night get transported up to court. They're left here at the station. So it's actually, and we still have to maintain court security up at the courts. So there's actually an increased cost because we have to supply individuals working in both locations. So that's increased our number of part-time hours to meet those requirements by the Police Services Act and the judiciary. The provincial responsibility, as I said, was downloaded to the municipality years ago. Next slide, please. And that's all there is from the Owen Sound side of it. I'd be pleased to take any questions, or we can move into Chief Knoll's presentation and combine them.
But I think I'd like to turn to questions with Chief Ambrose, if we could, before we get into the next one. I just want to speak before we take these questions here. I just want to let the committee know that, you know, when I was first elected in 2014, I think all but 2 councillors were new, like first-time councillors. And, you know, the feeling was that that the taxpayers of Owen Sound had just had enough of the previous council, and it was almost a complete flip of the entire council. And for the people, for the first time councillors knocking on doors, what we were finding the most complaints was our emergency services, which takes up about 46% of our budget. I don't think you can find anyone else in Ontario that has 46% of the budget to emergency services. So it was almost like a full-out blitz against our police department. And that was before Chief Ambrose's time, but I spent my first 4 years on the police board, and I was determined to, you know, find out what it is that are, why our costs are so high with the police department. And I think like it was hard for me to say it after my 4 years on the police board if I even accomplished anything. It was so difficult to get to the bottom of everything that was going on. We also went through an OPP costing. But fast forward to now, we have a new city manager in Tim Simmons. We have a new police chief in Craig Ambrose. And for the first time, we have transparency with our police department that we've never had before. Our director of corporate services, Kate Allen, has had complete access to the numbers, like where the money is going, where the everything about the money that we need to know as a council. And I think it's you know, I can't speak for all of council, but I think it's safe to say that we're at the point now where we have a police budget that's completely, like, way too high. We have police officers that are way overworked. And I think we've completely drained the swamp in terms of, you know, trying to find something. You know, we always had that mistrust feeling. I think the mistrust is gone now. I think we have a lot of trust in this chief, and we're convinced that, you know, something's got to give. We have to find a way to get more funding because of the situation we're in. So I just wanted to set that up for you, just so that you know that. And I should mention the dispatch service too, which is, you know, you'd like to think it would help offset the costs, and I think it does. I don't think we need to get into that, but you know, it could be a lot worse if we didn't have the dispatch service. So I'll just leave that information with you and open it up for questions. Councillor Milne.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good presentation, Chief Ambrose. Thank you very much. Just one question I wonder, and you talked a lot there about increased demand for service calls. Has any of that increase, or could any of that increase be attributed to what, you know, people call job creep? Or are you responding to more things now that maybe 10 years ago, the police service people wouldn't be calling you to look after? Are you looking after more things as opposed to more volume of the same things?
So generally, the role of police in the last 10 years has changed somewhat, but not dramatically. Mental health calls for service would be something that back, and I'm just going from my personal memory, but back in probably the early 2000s, a number of individuals who we deal with now on a regular basis would have been institutionalized during the former methods of dealing with mental health calls for service. So yes, that's probably the most significant increase and the most significant change. And obviously, we're the only agency of 24-hour, 7-day-a-week, 365-day response. And whether or not it's best handled by us is an argument that I would. I could say yes, we do a good job, and I think we do a good job. But I don't think we should be the ones doing that job. I don't think we should be the experts in that field. But until there's some type of a replacement situation, we're there and we're it. That would be the most significant change. The rest of the things would just simply be demands and calls for service on policing.
Right. And that's what I expected. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions? Gordon Hicks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the presentation, Chief Ambrose. One quick question. Students living in residence, are they counted towards the overall population for Owen Sound?
That's something that the city manager might better answer than I could, but I know from my past experience, I was in charge of the city of Waterloo, and there was a significant student presence that wasn't calculated in the city population. And there were estimates that it went up by about 60,000 between the three post-secondary educations locations in Waterloo. So I don't believe they are, but I defer that to the city manager, Mr. Simmons.
Students never cause any troubles.
Yeah.
So sorry, through the chair. I'd have to find out for certain, but I don't think it's not a vast number. As the chief said, I think there's about 1,000 students at Georgian, but a lot of them are day students coming into the campus each day and going out. But I can confirm for the next meeting and pass that along to Kim and to Randy to update in their next update for Friday.
Mr. Chairman, I would think that students, when they complete their census, would probably be indicating their home address as their home. So would probably be captured under those stats, despite the fact that for a good portion of the year, they're not actually living at home. They're living on campus someplace else. Looking at the chart that you presented, Chief Ambrose, talking about volumes of calls and comparing that with officers, it would strike me that your volume's up and your officers are down, which leads to the question, does Owen Sound have sufficient officers for the call volumes?
So my response to that would be that at the present time, no, that's caused us some issues. This budget that went to most recently to the City Council for approval was an attempt to start to remedy that situation. The number of officers under the Police Services Act should remain steady unless you have a hearing under Section 40 of the Police Services Act, which basically looks to determine adequate and effective policing services. That number has gone down or fluctuated. Whether the argument is that it was above complement and now it's at the present complement, or whether or not it's gone down, that predates my employment. So I can't answer that question. I'm not sure exactly where it got to, but that's the number we're at. And certainly our present ask, and that's before council for the current budget year, is to add 2 officers and start working our way back towards that, and to adequately and effectively do some proactive work to try and eliminate the charges and the issues and the calls for service on the back end.
Thank you. Those are my questions, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, any other questions? I have a couple, Councillor or Chief Ambrose. Kind of what Councillor Milne was talking about, but your comparisons with York. Are we responding to the same calls that York would, like their mental health? Like 1 in 20 versus 1 in 160 is a huge difference. Like for me, anyways. You would think that mental health is mental health. They wouldn't be responding to anything that we wouldn't be, sort of, would they?
I mean, obviously, calls for service are driven by just that. Individuals calling in and asking for assistance, and calls coming to us. This isn't the proactive side of things. So, I mean, we respond to what we get calls about, and so would they. But certainly, it would be very similar. I think a number of the issues that you're looking at there are housing, median income, obviously, housing, and addictions, and social determinants of health. When you're looking at a community like York, where there's a lot more, there's a lot more wealth, there's a lot more money there, that obviously that eliminates some of the issues and concerns when it comes to your mental health. So I think that, yes, we'd be responding to the same types of calls. We're only responding to those that we receive. So it's not like it's a number that we can artificially inflate by creating calls for service, because those are generated by a call into the comm center.
Right. So this is a bit of a loaded question, but many of the increased calls for service relate to what?
For us, many of them are assaults, disorder calls, non-compliance with release conditions and not following terms of release, I went through some of the issues with the catch and release program, certainly COVID, and a review by the provincial government made some changes to pre-sentence custody that increased the demands for service for policing significantly. COVID, they wanted to decrease the numbers of people in custody, awaiting sentencing, and also finishing off sentencing. So they wanted to reduce the numbers and reduce the risk to those in custody. So there were a number of changes that came out that created issues for policing, and repeat offenses is one of them that's significantly increased in the past year and a half.
What about stuff downloaded from the county, like the addictions and mental health?
But I think what you have here, the situation is that, as I said, from that justice study that was completed, people who are homeless, people who have addictions issues, and people who have mental health issues are far more likely to be victimized and become victims of crime. And I think what happens is when you focus and you create all the resources and supports in one area, what ends up happening is those individuals are concentrated in that area, and then along with the concentration of those individuals comes the fact that they're all victimized at a much higher rate, and that creates calls for service for the police, and it creates issues for policing, and it creates a concentrated problem. And I'll take it back to some of the rural areas within the county probably don't have a housing issue or a homelessness issue because there's nowhere that an individual can go where there's support to help them. So they're going to come to Owen Sound, they're going to be in Owen Sound, and or Hanover, or one of the population areas where they can get the services and the supports that they need. But along with that comes associated other issues and crime and calls for service.
Yeah, two more, one for you, one probably for Kim, but for you, I don't know if you'd have this number, but if we didn't have the court, what would that do to our budget? Can you ballpark that?
Yeah, so our 2021 budget moving forward for court security. Sorry, just give me 1 second. So we received government funding, or we're anticipating government funding for our court security grant of $422,000, just over. And that still leaves us with $335,900 that isn't covered. So if we don't receive the court security funding, we're looking at about $758,000 cost for court security.
So that's total.
Yeah. Now some of that would still be like there would be one staffing position that we'd still have to do for Owen Sound, but the majority of that is simply running the courts and doing the court security.
Okay, so Kim, I'm not sure if this is, if you can answer this. Revenue from Provincial Offences Act fines go to Grey County to offset provincial download of court security costs. Why to the county and not to Owen Sound to help with the $282,000 shortfall?
I'm not sure whether or not that's entirely accurate. Certainly, the county gets fine revenue for the fines that the county lays, which is primarily to do with our forests. We charge an administrative fee on the prosecutions that we do, but the fines primarily go back to either the municipality that laid the charge, or if it's a traffic charge, which is of course the bulk of them, that is separated out between Grey and Bruce based on population, and we run the court out of that revenue, and then what's left over after all is said and done, then that goes into the county budget. So what you're seeing out of the county budget for those traffic fines that go through the provincial offences court, I think our share this year is 300-ish when all is said and done. We know that the county share of court security, I think for the provincial offences court, is would that be maybe about $25,000, Chief? Do you think, for the time that's spent in the provincial offences court? That was kind of a rough thing that Amanda felt. So certainly there is some revenue that comes to the county, but it's not all of it, and that's how we work through that.
So should we be lobbying for more funding when it comes to that? Like, I guess it was a bad choice of words for me to, when I said downloaded from the county, I saw the smirks. That was a bit of a selfish comment, but
I think that's right. I think it's entirely appropriate to, whether or not is Owen Sound responding to the consultation, or is that consultation already closed with regard to court security that came out in November, December? I'm sorry, I've lost.
Yeah, so in response to that, we have filled out the information, and I've also followed up with an email for the city manager, the police services board chair, and myself to have a conference or Zoom call with the consultants. I believe that's later this week.
Oh, good. Because I think that, certainly it's a huge burden for a small place.
It's certainly a unique situation in the fact that most other municipalities or larger municipalities have a regional service that, so the courts are at a regional level and the policing's at a regional level, and therefore there's no distinction between the two. Yes.
Can I ask a question, Mr. Chair?
Sure.
Yeah, I just, hearing Chief Ambrose speak to, the issue of mental health calls, and Chief, are you aware of other places that have got partners that they're working with that are maybe taking a stronger share of that load? Are there other models that we should be looking at for the dealing with the mental health calls?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. And it's something that we're always looking at, is how do we effectively move forward and work on that. So just shortly after I arrived, I contacted Gray Bruce, CMHA Gray Bruce, and Dr. Clark McFarland, who was new at the time as well. And so we brought in the mobile mental health addictions response team and piloted it here in Owen Sound, partly because of the numbers and the ability to keep people busy doing that, but also partly because we were the first ones to the door asking for it. Similarly, I've reached out and had a conference call with Clark again last week, and we're looking at other options and as well, including some resources from Grey County, EMS and things, to try and look at other options and other models in place in other municipalities and try and expand it and bring it here as well to try and limit those calls for service. Because obviously the best way and the best outcome for anybody is to avoid that crisis and that call for service. Yes. So what we would like to get to is where our officers and our mobile mental health addictions response team is doing the proactive stuff, going out with the community partners, avoiding that person getting into crisis in the first place, avoiding that call to police, and having a much better outcome on the front end. So we are still looking at that, and we're looking at other options to move in that direction.
Good.
So,
okay.
So to Kim's point, if we had mental health responding to some of these calls, it really doesn't work though, does it? Because they won't be a first responder. So you would always have to be first to the door if mental health is going to be involved.
In a lot of the circumstances and a lot of the situations, yes, we would. They'll be hesitant to respond on their own. Obviously, there has to be a safe environment. So that being said, we are looking at responding with our mobile mental health officer, who's not in a uniform, who doesn't present that same image when they come to the door with the mental health worker. It kind of breaks down that barrier. That's the hope is that we can move forward with that program so that, yes, the police are there in case there's an issue, but we're looking at spending in terms of reference to try and make that a first response rather than a follow-up response where you're already behind the 8 ball, where the officers have gone in and there's that perception of the officer in the uniform who's come to deal with your problem. So there are opportunities that we're looking at and as to how we do that and how we break those barriers. But oftentimes, if there's any indication of danger or there's any indication of a concern for anybody's well-being, the officers are going to have to respond, or an officer is going to have to respond first. One of the other things that is being piloted in other areas, and it's something that we may look at here as well, is they're starting to put mental health workers in the communication center where they will, if the call for service comes in and it's not really a police matter and it's not really something that needs a police response, as opposed to not providing any service or trying to connect them to another service like 211 or 511 or any of those other services, the mental health worker can deal with it right there and take over the call. So there's a number of different options that we're trying to look at. It's a matter of how best to implement that. Funding for implementing that obviously is another concern, and I think it was really important. My last communication with CMHA Gray Bruce was that this pandemic is causing all kinds of issues for individuals, and mental health is going to be a serious matter for a number of people that it's never affected in the past before. And one of the things about a pandemic like this, where it goes on and on, is you put everything aside until it ends, and then the fourth wave of the pandemic isn't necessarily the pandemic; it's the follow-up from then the emotional and mental health toll that it's taken on everybody that's been involved in that pandemic for the last year. So that's a concern for all of us moving forward, especially first responders and all the different services, not just policing.
So Chief, I don't know if there's a statistic, but like the number of times that you would respond to a mental health call where the person doesn't really need to be intimidated by an officer in uniform and more or less needs a hug more than anything. Like how big a number of calls would that be? Like, would it be half them, or not even close to half, or would you know?
I'd hate to guess at a number, but those are the types of situations where these alternate response type of situations that we're looking at would be the ones that we take over and expand the terms of reference to the ones that we can do that with. But I can't say I can't give you a percentage of that.
Right, but that's in the works, correct? That
yes, it is. Yes, it is, and the idea would be that it's a moving bar. It's what the workers are comfortable responding to. It's what the police officer. There's a bit of a familiarity thing, and certainly it's easier to implement that here in Owen Sound, where there's backup distance away than maybe it is outside in a more rural area where the distance that somebody else is coming. If you go to the wrong call, it might be a little bit longer to get somebody there to help you out. That something can go wrong. So that's why we're looking at expanding it and trying to figure it out and work it here and then move it forward.
Okay, Councillor Milne.
I was just going to say, I did Wellington County OPP not have a fairly successful, and maybe continue to have a fairly successful type of mental health first response program? You may be familiar with that, Chief Ambrose.
Yeah, they do. So what happened was it was originally piloted out of Waterloo Region when I was working there.
Right.
And then they took the, because it's great, mental health, Cambridge, or it's Waterloo, Wellington mental health there. So they expanded and went into Wellington County and Guelph and the county. And then one of the things they did in Waterloo was implement that same system in Waterloo, and then that's kind of what we've implemented here as well. It's very similar to it. It's not the same name, but it's the same concept.
Yeah, and I think they've had, from what I hear, they've had really good success with it. With the limited, with the constraints that, budgets and everything else create. I had a quick question, if I might, Mr. Chair.
Sure.
Chief, what is your cost per capita for your budget, roughly?
I actually don't have that number with me. I could find that out and get it back to you, but I don't.
Sure. If you just respond to I don't know who respond to Randy rather, and he can send that to all of us, maybe. I'd be interested to know what that number is. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions for Chief Ambrose? Warden Hicks?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to be careful about broaching this subject because it can be sensitive, but I have heard anecdotally that female police officers are generally more effective at bringing down the temperature. Has there been any research, any data to support that sort of thought in mind of thought that hiring, focusing on hiring female police officers actually helps to bring down, I know that you can do training with anyone, but maybe it's the chauvinistic thinking that, well, I don't hit females. And so maybe there's more of a reluctance for somebody becoming aggressive with a female. Is there any data on that?
I'm not familiar with the data specifically related to that, but anecdotally, I would agree with you. I've heard the same thing, and there probably is some evidence-based research that's been done relating to that. I think it's important to say that it doesn't matter male, female, or person of color. It's the important thing for any police service is to reflect the community that they serve, and certainly the disproportionate number of male officers to female officers in any setting. We're working away at that, and I'm happy to say we just hired a young lady who's on her way down to police college tomorrow to start her training. So yes, everybody brings different attributes to the game, and it's best to have a well-rounded team, regardless of what that is.
I would almost worry about the opposite of that. You know, if there's someone that's going to be aggressive against a woman police officer, it would be someone with mental health issues, and that's kind of scary in itself. But any other questions for Chief Ambrose? Okay, we should get moving on then. Thanks, Chief. Great presentation. Good discussion. That was good. On to item 5 then, Policing Perspectives in Hanover. Chief Chris Knoll, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, task force members there. So yeah, it was a good presentation by Chief Ambrose. And what I always say about Hanover is we are a mini Owen Sound. That's what we are. We are mini Owen Sound. They're like a big brother to us, and the work that they do, we do just in smaller numbers. So if I could just get you to move into my presentation here.
Yes, just give me 1 second.
Certainly. I'll just tell the task force too, we had a call this morning with a mental health patient. The person went into crisis, and the reason that person went into crisis was because they got turned down by WSIB. So probably a year ago, we would have done an apprehension under the Mental Health Act, taken that person to the hospital. But what happened was we were able to get the mobile crisis team there, and they're working with that person now. So to me, we're moving in the right direction, and that's just a good example of a recent one that just happened here this morning. So if we could just move to the overview here, quick to the overview. So I'm going to cover off a bit of an introduction. I'm going to talk about our community, some of our workload demands, and then a few of our community relationships and our partners that we deal with. If I could just get the next slide there. So everyone talks, when we talk about the Hanover Police, we're actually, I call us small but mighty. We're small but mighty. We police 365 days like every other police service, 7 days a week. We've been in existence since at least the 1930s. We have 14 full-time police officers, myself included, a deputy chief, a sergeant, 11 constables. We have 4 part-time constables that help us with scheduling and training and that. We have 2 full-time special constables and 1 part-time admin. Next slide, please. So when you look at our community, so in 2019, our population was 8,100 residents, and that's according to a Stats Canada. I know that's not the census number, but that's a Stats Canada number that we are working with, and that's from a crime severity report. We do consider ourselves a regional hub, lots similar to Owen Sound. We say we draw a population of between 40 and 45,000 people that use our municipality as a hub. You know, they come for their business needs, employment, social services, healthcare, schools, recreation, culture, entertainment, accommodation, shopping, and other service needs. When you look at actually the age of our population, I always say about half of our population is over 45. The other half of the population is under 45. And then when you talk about our community, the population, we have a population of marginalized people. We have a transient population. We have a population that suffer from mental health issues. We have poverty, homelessness, and drug and alcohol dependencies. And when you look at some of these issues, like a lot of these people, like the person today, they had an alcohol issue and a drug dependency mixed with a mental health. So bad combinations which draw on police work. Next slide, please. So when you look at our incomes per household, when you look at, you know, $0 to even $29,000, we have almost 1,000 households in our community that are making under $29,000. That's a significant number to me, because to me, you know, people, poverty can drive more police involvement. And that's obviously people living in poverty, and some of those are very working poor. We only have, on the other end of the scale, we only have 230 households making over $150,000. So, and according to our Stats Canada report, the most recent one that we have available to us, we only had 3,500 households. So when you think of that 3,500 households, when 1,000 of them are making under $29,000, to me, that's a significant issue. Next slide, please. So like Chief Ambrose said too, our 2019 numbers have come out after this was prepared, but I can tell you they're consistent with the 2018 numbers that I'm going to present on. So when you look at our criminal code occurrences here, we were second in the province of Ontario out of the 50 municipal police services for criminal charges processed per officer. So when you take all of our criminal charges and you divide them by the number of officers, we were second in the province, second to Brockville Police, and right in behind us was Owen Sound Police. We processed 56.6 criminal charges per officer in 2018. And like I said, Brockville was at 60 charges per officer. When you look at the provincial average, in Ontario, the average police officer will process 23.3 criminal charges. And when you look at the national average across Canada, the average police officer will process 29.7 criminal charges. So when you think of, you know, when you look at our numbers, the number of criminal processes that we're preparing and we're processing, it takes a lot of work to process criminal charges. I think we have a few lawyers on this task force here, and they can tell us that, you know, when we put together Crown briefs even today versus 20 years ago, significant change in the amount of work that we have to do. And then on the bottom end of the spectrum here is LaSalle Police. They produce 7.6 criminal charges per officer. So when you have a place like LaSalle producing 7.6 criminal charges per officer, that tells me that they are able to do more proactive work in the community. They can do other police work that basically makes the community safer and keeps it safer. When you look at the big numbers like ourselves in Owen Sound, we spend a lot more time reacting, investigating, and processing criminal charges. And you think about Toronto Police, you know, we're only a couple hours from the city of Toronto, but you think about the average, what the average Toronto police officer prepares, they produce 25.9 criminal charges per officer. Again, essentially half of the work that ourselves in Hanover and Owen Sound are doing. Next slide, please. This just gives you a few of our comparisons here. So when you look at Owen Sound, like I said, they're actually second on the list. Brockville would be above us. But these are some of our comparators that I would compare to. When you think of the city of Orangeville, 22, they're pretty consistent with Chief Ambrose's population. West Grey, they're our next door neighbor. They produce 24 criminal charges per officer. Shelburne, 21. Saugeen Shores, 30. Elmer Police, 21. Smith Falls, 28. Port Hope, 17. Deep River, 10. And like I said, the Canadian average and the provincial average in Toronto's there too. So it's just a chart to show you kind of where we sit provincially and with some of our policing partners. Here's our calls for service for the last number of years. They spiked in 2019. We had just over 5,000, almost 5,100 calls in 2019. This 2020 number may look a little bit low, but we have changed the way we process some of our criminal charges. For example, right now we're not doing we're not doing the volume of ride programs we were, but now when we do a ride program, we do 4 calls for service per year. We're generating 4 calls per service for 1 per each quarter. And then we're creating an Excel spreadsheet for each ride program, and it gets populated once per quarter under that call for service. Same with our foot patrols. Our foot patrols get scored once per quarter. So basically, instead of having 150 or 200 foot patrols listed as individual calls for service, we're only having 4. And the reason we've done that is really we're trying to reduce the amount of reporting that we're doing. We're still capturing the work on Excel spreadsheets. We're still putting that data in to our niche database, our police database, but it's we're finding it's saving us time. It's creating some efficiencies that way, and we're not having to go through. There's a lot of work for each individual call for service, such as coding and linking information and supervisory approvals. Instead of doing that 150 times a year for foot patrols, we're doing that 4 times a year. Same with the ride programs, school presentations, even our traffic enforcement. Some police services, I'm not sure how Owen Sound does it, but some police service, every traffic stop is a call for service. We generate 1 call for service per officer per month. And then all of their information gets populated under that individual call for service. So that those numbers can look a little bit skewed a little bit, but you just have to keep in mind that, we're probably pacing like 2020, probably pacing about 5,000 calls if I looked at our numbers the way we did them in 2019. Next slide there. So this gives you populations. This is right from Stats Canada. It's a Stats Canada chart that they produce for us. It's for populations of between 5 and 15,000. So you can see the first column there is the population. So our population listed by Stats Canada is 8,137 residents. This was a number for this year, for 2019. These are 2019 numbers. So when you look at our crime severity index, so our overall crime severity index, we're at 125 points. Our violent crimes at 65 points, and our non-violent crime severity index is at 146 points. So I don't like to compare ourselves to the First Nations communities, but when you look at the other non-First Nations communities like Elmer, they're only a couple hundred population below the town of Hanover. Their crime severity index sits at 45 points. Their violent crime severity sits at 46 points. Their non-violent crime severity index sits at 45 points. And then the next one I bring your attention to is Dryden Police. Dryden does have a high population of First Nations members, but they're just a couple hundred people below our population. Their crime severity sits at 158 points. Their violent crime severity index sits at 132 points, and their nonviolent crime is 166 points. When you look at West Grey, our neighbors right to our east, their population is about 5,000 people more than ours. Their crime severity is 47 points, their nonviolent crime 38 points, and their nonviolent crime severity index sits at 50 points. So you can kind of go through, take a look at those numbers, but where we really want to be is where Shelburne is. And I talk to the chief in Shelburne a lot, and I always tell him he's got the gold standard down there, because when you look at his population, he has close to 1,000 people more than the town of Hanover, and their crime severity index sits at 31 points. And then their violent crime sits at 53, non-violent crime sits at 23, and they're honestly, to me, they're the gold standard, and we need to be where they're at. And I can't really explain the difference in the demographics in the community. I don't really know enough about Shelburne, but that's where I want to be. Next slide, please. So in 2019, these are the top 6 highest overall crime rates in Ontario across the board. So Timmins has the highest crime severity in all of Ontario, sitting at 137. Hanover is second in all of Ontario, sitting at 125. Brockville is third, sitting at 112. Owen Sound is fourth, sitting at 106. Sault Ste. Marie at 107, Thunder Bay at 104. That rounds out your top 6. And then in Canada, you're looking at 75 points for the across the country from coast to coast. And in Ontario, you're looking at 60 points. And then I just threw Toronto in here just to give you an idea where Toronto sits, and West Grey being our closest neighbor. So, next slide, please. So last year, out of our 5,098 calls for service, you know, the 5 most frequent crime calls that we deal with are thefts, break-ins, assaults, frauds, and mischiefs. And a lot of these crimes, I call them survival crimes because for the most part, when you have thefts and break-ins, those 2 are the biggest 2 that we deal with for crime calls. And they're, in my mind, for the most part, they're survival crimes. You know, thefts from cars, break-ins to businesses, break-ins to homes. These people aren't putting thousands of dollars into their bank accounts. Really what they're trying to do is most likely feed an addiction is what they're trying to do, or they're trying to survive. So to me, that's what I would call survival crime. Out of all those almost 5,100 calls for service, we estimate, and I'm going to start tracking this in 2021, but we estimate that between 50 and 60% of our work involve non-residents. About 50 to 60% involve non-residents or people with no fixed address. And we have a significant population, like I said before, of people that have alcohol and drug dependency, poverty, homelessness, transient lifestyle, mental health, and family violence. And like Chief Ambrose said, you know, do you go to a community that has 1,000 people in it with no services? Or do you go to your biggest center where there is services? And I can personally tell you, I have spoken to people before and I said, what brought you to Hanover? And they said, oh, my worker's in Hanover. And I said, your worker? He said, yeah, my worker, my mental health worker, my addictions, my concurrent addictions counselor. And, you know, I don't have a license. I'm a 40-year-old male. I'm suspended. My license is suspended. I came from Teeswater and, you know, there's nothing in Teeswater for me. So I moved here and I like it here. But, you know, that's drawing our police work. And that's just an example of some of the things that we deal with. Next slide, please. So out of our estimated 5,098 calls for service, we believe that we generate about 16,000 police or public contacts per year. We also process in the town of Hanover about 600 background checks every year. And then we also estimate that we deal with about over 2,000 walk-ins to our police service every year, looking for calls for service, dealing with calls for service, background checks, general information, and other reasons. And I will tell you that we have a high population of people dropping into our police station because we're kind of handy. We're visible, we're on the main street. People come here to do their banking and they need information. They may be from outside our municipality, or they may want to report something and they said, well, we're in town, we'll report it. You know, if we can take the report, we will. If it belongs to another jurisdiction, we'll move it along. But those are some of the things that drive our work. Next slide, please. So this here, it just gives you an idea of our uniform crime reporting. So as Chief Ambrose said, we're responsible for sending this information into Stats Canada. We have to do it every year. We send in, we do coding of our calls for service, and we have to report on our crimes. So when you look at, this is 2019 numbers, when you look along this list here, most of these municipalities are similar size to us, with the exception of Orangeville, Owen Sound, and Strathroy, Caradoc. Most of those other police services are consistent with us. We're pacing, so we had 606 crimes reported in 2019. We're pacing similar to Orangeville, population of Orangeville. And then you look at Big Brother there up in Owen Sound, they're double Orangeville, they're double us, they're pretty well double everybody. But we should really, like I said, I like to be where Shelburne is. If you look at the Shelburne number, 146 reported crimes for 2019, that's where we should be at. And that's my goal, and that's where I want to strive for. But, you know, I'm going to show you a slide here showing a bit of the history. For whatever reason, we have always had a significant crime rate here in the town of Hanover, and I can't explain it, but I will show you a slide here dealing with that. Next slide. So this is a comparison here with Hanover being the first bar, if you look across. So it starts in 2005, moves across until 2020. And this is just a quick comparison of Hanover, Shelburne, and West Grey. So over the first bar in every year is the blue bar is Hanover, Town of Hanover Police. The second bar is red is Shelburne Police. And the third bar is West Grey Police. So you can see where we sit. We're always maintaining, you know, high numbers. So right from 2005 right through to 2020, you know, and like I said before, Shelburne's, in my mind, the gold standard. That's where we should be, but we're always paced high. And if you look at our numbers in 2006, we had almost 700 reported crimes. And I kind of think that's, I'd have to look back at the records, but I kind of think that's when methamphetamine really started to take a hold of our communities. So that really drives crime rates. I will tell you this, if you have a methamphetamine problem in your community, it drives a significant portion of your crime. And again, it's all related to survival type crimes. So we did have a good year here in 2020. If you look, we were just, I think we're around 445 or 450 reported crimes. And in 2019, we're actually just up over 600. So be interested to see if we can keep that trend moving in the right direction. But, you know, part of it, I think, was pandemic related. People had money gifted to them through CERB. You know, with a lot of our big box stores and that, we didn't have the shoplifting complaints that we did because they had limited people in the stores. You know, I think for the most part, our crime did drop off a little bit here in 2020. Hopefully we can keep that going. Next slide, please. So our mental health calls, this is our mental health calls. So when you look at, I went back to 2015, it is that little piece of pie there with the number 88 on it. That was in 2015. We almost doubled into 2016, and we have not got under 100 mental health calls since. So to me, like the Chief Ambrose said, you know, a lot of our mental health calls are driven by people that just need a little bit of extra support, and for whatever reason they can't focus, they can't maintain, you know, they're living without, you know, they have different issues that precipitate them going into crisis that cause us to become involved. So next slide, please. And these are just some of the partners. We rely heavily on our partners. We are, like I said, we're small but mighty, but we deal, I would say, on a daily basis with the Hanover District Hospital. I would say on a daily basis with the Mental Health Urgent Response Team, Canadian Mental Health Association daily, probation and parole services weekly, our policing partners daily, correctional services, I would say probably weekly. And we deal a lot with Grey Bruce Addiction Services, the YMCA. You know, we talk about police work. We think, what is police work? Well, like Chief Ambrose said, who do you call at 3 o'clock in the morning and you have no place to go and it's freezing cold and you're in January? Who do you call? You know, you end up going to the police service and you say, listen, it's -20 out, I need a place tonight. So we'll put them in emergency shelter through our partnerships with YMCA and also Salvation Army by putting them up in temporary type of situations there. We also deal a lot with Keystone. We refer people lots to Keystone, you know, with Child and Family Youth Services. One of the things I always say, we have a friend or a friend of the family who is involved with Healthy Babies program through the public health. And I said, you know what, they should front end load your position, because what she does is she works with young mothers of infants and young children. And if you really front end load that, those types of services, maybe come 15 years old, we won't maybe deal with little Johnny. You know, maybe that mother will have, mother or father will have mechanisms and coping mechanisms in place so that when that child is 10, 12, 13, 14 years old, you don't deal with those type of people. I had a sergeant when I first started the job. I joined the job in 1992. And what he told me, he said, son, when you get to third generation, it's time to retire. He says, you know what, once you get the third generation, it's time to retire. So you'll deal with grandpa. Once you get to, you'll deal with a 15-year-old kid and you'll move through your career. And, you know, eventually he becomes the dad and eventually he becomes the grandpa, but you also deal with his son and his grandson. And you know what, I can honestly say, you know, as I come up to the tail end of my career, that is true. It's just, it's a cycle, and I can't explain why. And I'm not here to tell you, preach as to why. And I think I see Chief Ambrose nodding. He can probably say the same thing. But you deal with generations of families, and it's unfortunate, but it's true. Just some of the other community partners, is the church and the seniors groups. We work with them. We're heavily involved with our school community, our business community, our town department, and our town council here. We want to work closely with our council to keep them up to date as to what's going on. Next slide, please. And subject to that, that's my presentation. And if there's any questions, I'm prepared to take them.
Thank you, Chief. That was a great presentation. Just before we get to questions, I just want to pop backwards there and ask City Manager Tim Simmons. Tim, did you happen to get a per capita number there at all?
Yeah, sure, through you, Chair. So I asked quickly, our per capita cost is $351. Per capita is $351, but that excludes the court costs. So Chief, I think you said that's up towards 800,000. So you could tack on another $30 or $40 per capita on that. So it's more probably closer to the range of 400 with the court costs in there.
Great, thank you, Mr. Simmons. Councillor Milne.
Thank you for that additional information, for sure. In the interest of being fair, I want to ask the same question of Chief Knoll. Do you have your per capita cost there?
So I don't have a per capita cost here right handy, but I can tell you.
What's your total budget?
So we're 2.8 million.
Okay.
About 2.85, but hang on a second here. I'm just going to see if I can find something. So our in 2018, I have the 2018 numbers here right handy. So the operating cost for policing Hanover, the households was actually, it was $209,000 below the municipal average. And the municipal average for operating costs in 2018 was $871.
That's per household.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, that's a per house. Yeah, sorry, that's a per household cost. I don't have the per capita right handy.
Well,
So,
if you just divide 2.8 by 8,100.
Yeah, no, exactly. It's a little bit more than 2.8. I'd honestly like to get back to you on that, just to get you the actual firm number.
Well, I'm just looking for some relativity, but so I appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, other questions for Chief Knoll? Deputy Warden McQueen. You're on mute.
It does work better when you hit that unmute button. Just regards to Hanover, and just sort of a more, I guess, a bit of a generic question in a sense, but with regards to the lottery or the slots or the what's offered by the province, is there any related to that gambling, related to policing cost, or is there any funds that also come from related to gambling cost and associations with that, or is that a very small part of that Hanover? I'm not going to call it a casino, but whatever I'm trying to think what you call it. I had a tour of it there last year when the warden hosted it there.
So yeah, so our calls for service to the casino. First of all, the casino revenue for the town of Hanover, it goes to the town of Hanover, and we are allowed to use that for capital purchases. We can do submit through our budget and through our town council, through our police services board, and then through our council, capital costs. And those capital costs, to my knowledge, our deputy mayor may be able to confirm this, but to my knowledge, the capital costs come from the revenues from the casino. As far as our calls for service to the casino, I'm told it brings in between, normally pre-pandemic and hopefully post-pandemic, it brings in between 800 and 1,000 people a day. So when you think about that, when it brings in between 800,000 people per day, our work with those people aren't necessarily at the casino itself. Sometimes we do get called there for rowdy people or for people that have what they call self-excluded. They've trespassed themselves and now they're trying to sneak back in. We get calls there for that. But those 800 to 1,000 people, they also go to our restaurants. They back into each other in the parking lots, which drives police work. They lose their keys, which drives police work because they come in and say, hey, listen, I lost my cell phone or my set of keys. Will you take a report and call me if we get called, if you find them. There's lots of calls that can be generated. I always say that bush lots do not drive police work, but people drive police work. So wherever you have people, you will have call volumes. You know, and Toronto is on the other extreme where they have international visitors. So that's, you know, that's kind of the thing with wherever you have your populations, that's where you're going to drive your police work. The casino does drive some of our police work. It's nothing crazy significant though.
Yeah, okay, well, I appreciate it. I just wondered if there was some relationship to revenue to cost of doing that. And I guess that's just like an overall budget that you sort of look at. But that's interesting that you bring in 8 to 1,000 people a day into Hanover. And I could see you get the call, honey, I don't have a house anymore.
Right.
I'm sure you get all kinds of social, you know, because
right.
It's an addicting situation and circumstances arise and all those things. So thank you very much for that information.
Yes.
Any other questions?
I did some quick calculations here for Mr. Milne. And based on a $2.85 million budget at about a population of 8,150, we're looking at about $349 per capita. $349, so say $350 per capita based on a population of 8,150 people, a budget of $2.85 million.
Councilor Milne, you're on mute.
Sorry, so I was going to say, if you exclude the court costs in Owen Sound, you're pretty comparable to Owen Sound.
I think so.
Which is a long way from where, you know, and I'm just using for comparison, Southgate at $200. Of course, we're using OPP, but we're at around $200 per capita.
Right.
So, anyway,
yeah.
And I'm not saying, you know, one's
Yep.
better or worse than the other. I'm just comparing numbers. That's all. Thank you.
No, for sure. Absolutely. Yes.
So Chief, you have your population increases 40 to 45,000 during the day. So it's pretty much the same as Owen Sound.
So that number too, we use that number as who uses this as a service center. I'd have to confirm that number through the town. I don't think that's a per day population. I think that would be a population who uses our municipality as a service center.
Okay, because I thought that was a little high, but you didn't have a graph. Would you show calls for service to spike probably between 9:30 in the morning and 4:30 in the afternoon, the same as Owen Sound? Or
absolutely. I didn't have a graph, but I can say without a doubt, first of all, as the week progresses, our calls go up until we hit Saturday. So Friday calls, they peak on Fridays. And most of our calls are between, I'm going to say 10:30 in the morning and 4 or 5 o'clock at night. So the bulk of our calls are in the afternoon. That's when they peak. And our busiest day in the town of Hanover was we had 24 calls, I think, on a day shift one day. We had 24 calls for service. And keep in mind, we only have 2 or 3 officers working at any given time. So there is no sitting around in our municipality.
Right. It's so comparable. Like I know in Owen Sound, our downtown core, our DIA is always asking for more foot patrol or more police presence downtown. And in terms of priority, it comes last. So almost all the time, our officers, by the time they get in their cruiser from one call, there's 3 more in the queue already, and you lose that. The other thing I wanted to ask was charges per officer. That is a huge difference. Like on like the provincial average at 23.3, and you're at 56.6. That's in no way difference in policing, correct? Like the OPP doesn't police any different than you or Owen Sound.
No, we use the same criminal code from coast to coast. We use the same charter of rights, and the charges are what they are. I can't really explain why we have such high volume, but we have a high prisoner count and high number of charges per officer.
Okay, thanks. Councillor Milne?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I see that Barb Fetty's on the line. I'm just wondering if, maybe this question is directed to her. We talked when we were listening to Chief Ambrose about, do we invest more money into mental health interactions first rather than sending a police officer first, or a combination thereof? I don't want to boil this whole conversation down to dollars and cents, but ultimately money, we follow the money, right? So is it more cost effective to invest more into mental health as opposed to police services? And I'm seeing you're saying yes, but I mean, that would be intuitively my answer too, but I'm just wondering if you can help me and talk to that a little bit, please.
Sure. Thank you for, can you hear me?
Yep, absolutely.
Okay. So
I can see you too.
Okay, perfect. So I 100% believe in the investment up front. The upstream, the discussion that Chris was talking about where there's third generation, if you can break that cycle by investing up front, it's, there is a cost benefit analysis and it's $7 to 1. At least that was the last I'd heard. So $1 spent saves $7 later, and it's not just the services. I don't mean just the service. That's the wrong. I'm not saying the right thing. It's everything. It's education. It's trajectory. It's healthcare. It's the impacts to Chief Ambrose and Chief Knowles' day-to-day frontline staffers. It's mental health impacts and people's resiliency. It's everything. So it's all about those early years and what the impacts look like. And that's the importance of that community safety and well-being plan that we've got rolling out. We meet, it's Wednesday already this week that we're starting our work plan for this year. And there's, we worked really hard to meet the original deadline, and we did. So we've been to each lower tier municipality, each of the police services boards, and the 2 counties. And now we're looking at how do we move forward and build the strategies with the existing tables. We're not going to duplicate anything. We're going to say who's going to do what and work at connecting the links so that we have that infrastructure, that safety net. And it does go back to the social determinants of health. So this is what I eat, sleep, and breathe, so I won't bore the rest of you, but I do believe in the investment early on.
So, and if I could follow up then, Chair. So Barb, if it's that clear cut,
yep.
Like who's not getting the message then?
Well, it's okay. So social assistance, you get $733 a month, a single person to live on. But when you were without work, CERB gave you $2,000. Where's, immediately, that's the first one I can come up with.
So
the
guaranteed
basic,
income.
Totally. National strategy for childcare. Get the kids into childcare where they learn their own strategies, where they eat properly, where there's, parents have some supports. They have a network to draw on. There's resources. All of those pieces really make sense to me.
Yeah. So it seems so obvious, yet we seem to struggle. Anyway, yeah, it's frustrating. So anyway, I commend everyone that's working on this, but boy, we got a long way to go. Thank you.
I commend you, Councillor Milne, for not mentioning the Conservative government, because I know you were thinking.
I don't think I had to. That's fairly obvious too, isn't it? But that's another story.
Sure. Thanks for that, Barb. That was great. Any other questions for Chief Knoll? Okay, we'll move on then. Thanks very much, Chief and Chief Ambrose. Those are great presentations, good discussions. Really appreciate it. We'll move on to item 6, other business. Kim, do we have any other business?
Not that I'm aware of, sir.
Okay. Item 7, our next meeting date, January 15th, which is really close by, actually. We're going to have another quick one, back to back. And number 8, adjournment. Do we have a mover and a seconder?
I will do that.
Councillor Milne. Oh, Councillor Desai, nice to hear from you. Thank you very much.
Well, he
Meeting
is
adjourned.
there. That's right. Yeah. Yeah, that's good.
Meeting
Thank you
adjourned.
all.